Amen. Well, this Sunday morning, I get the opportunity to close out our Made for More series. And this has been a really great series. It's spoken to a lot of people. And I just believe the Lord is using this in a really powerful way. And this morning is the climax of the series. This morning is the word that is probably the umbrella word over all the other words this morning. And I just want to encourage you, the Lord has something to say to you today, no matter what season you are in your faith. We have a saying around here at Neighbor Church, take your right next step. That means if you're a baby Christian, if you're a mature Christian, or anybody in between, you have a next step you can take that's the right step. Take it. And take it and grow in the Lord. And so this morning, I believe the Lord's going to talk to you about some steps in your life that he wants to say to you this morning. And so just so you can be encouraged this morning, turn to your neighbor and say, the Lord has something to say to you today. Okay, and all the people that didn't listen to the instructions, turn to the other people on the other side and say, the Lord has something to say to you today. All right. That's not supposed to be funny. Just kidding. Just kidding. Hey, this morning, I want to share with you some perspective. As a pastor, I have a very privileged place to walk with people in life, both in good and bad things, and things in between. I get to walk with people. People come and process life with me. Sometimes they get to give wisdom. Sometimes they get to give prayer. Sometimes they get to give support, encouragement. One of the hardest things that I experience walking with people is the experience when I see people in life, all different walks of life and seasons in life, who have climbed a ladder. You know, a ladder, right, is a symbol in our culture of arriving at a goal or a pursuit, right? I'm climbing the ladder. The ladder is a goal or a pursuit, and somewhere at the top of that ladder, wherever it is, however tall it is the goal or pursuit that we are pursuing, and the rungs on the ladder, they demonstrate or represent the effort that we've put in, and maybe even the steps up that we've taken to get closer to that goal. And every rung of the ladder represents a season of your life, because I can't get to the next step in that process without having put some investment into it, right? And I put investment into that, and I get to the next advancement in my pursuit, and I say, whew, look at that. That season paid off in my life, right? And one of the most tragic experiences that I have with people, walking with people, is when they come to my office with this realization. The ladder I was climbing and the goal I was pursuing is not as valuable as the one on the other wall. I got here and I realized that this thing I thought was super valuable is actually not as valuable as that thing I wish I would have pursued over here. This thing has more meaning than this over here. And you realize in that moment that I have spent my life and my seasons getting up to the rung, and to realize I can't respin that season. That season is gone. That effort is gone. Those years are gone. Those days are gone. Those things I did are gone. And we begin to realize some of the biblical truths that we find in Scripture that are true. And we realize that it was true of where I put my ladder and what wall I put my ladder. And here's these biblical truths. Number one, you can only spend your life once. That's not a worldly truth. That's a biblical truth. Your life is short. How you spend your life today determines your outcome tomorrow. That's a biblical truth. Personal and temporary happiness does not fulfill you like you think it does. The Bible tells us that. Spending your life today on things that last forever is the only thing that fulfills our true design and how God built us and how he wired us. These are biblical truths. And when you walk with somebody who's gotten up a ladder on a wall that made them say yes to this and say no to some other things, and they regret that, you begin to realize that they blew past some of those biblical warnings. Because God has a design for us of how to spend our lives. And if we will follow his design, there's great fulfillment. This is why Jesus took such great staking pains to prepare his disciples for his leaving. On the last few moments that he had with the disciples, where he was preparing them for his leaving, and you see him in the upper room, and he begins to take off his outer garment, and we see him take up a towel, and we see him begin to get down on his knees and begin to wash the feet of the disciples. The disciples were a little at awe by this. They were shocked. Peter was offended, said, "You can't do that." Jesus said, "If I can't do that, you have no part with me." He's like, "Well, then wash everything." Right? And he gets down and he says this, John 13, "Now that I, your Lord and teacher, have washed your feet, you also should wash each other's feet. I've set for you an example that you should do as I have done for you. And now that you know this, you will be blessed if you do it." Jesus is preparing them for the life that they're supposed to live, for the wall that they're supposed to put the ladder up against. He's saying, there's going to be a lot of walls out there that are going to be calling out to you. I'm telling you, this is the wall. Spending yourself for others is the wall that you are to lean your ladder up against. It was that very same night, and just actually not that many moments later, he took a cup and he held it up and he said this. He says, he gave thanks for it and he said this, "This is my blood of the covenant that is being poured out for the sins of many." He uses this word poured out, being spent. You see, why is Jesus doing this? Many people look in that moment and they say, this is Jesus preparing them for his death and resurrection. But it was more, yes, that's true, but it was more than that. He's also preparing them and helping them know the life that they're supposed to live after the death and resurrection, to prepare them to know how to follow his lead, follow his example. I am serving, I am being poured out, follow me. I am being spent, I am being poured out, follow me. Follow me to the places of service. Follow me to the places of sacrifice. Follow me to the place of pouring out your lives for the benefit of others. Follow me. How do we know that that's what his focus was? Because the Apostle Paul in Philippians chapter 2 points out back to this moment and to what Jesus did. And he says, that's the example. That's the example. He says this, he says, do not look to your own interest, Paul says, but look to the interest of others. In your relationships with others, have the same mindset, meaning attitudes and actions, as that of who? Jesus Christ. He's the example. Who is the very nature God, but did not consider equality with God something to be used for his own advantage. Instead, he became nothing. And he took on the nature of a servant, being made in human likeness. He was found to be in the image of man, and he humbled himself. And he became obedient to death, even death on the cross. Paul says to his fellow brothers and sisters in Philippians, the people that he pastored, he started the church. He says, that's the example. Follow the example. So how do we see this? Jesus is in the upper room. Here's the example. Follow it. Paul is in Philippians 2. Here's the example. Follow it. And what is the example? Pour out. Spend your life on his purposes. Spend it. Spend it. This is the encouragement that we need to have today. You see, we're being made for more. We're being made for more. There's in this room, every single one of us has a list of people who have spent their own lives on themselves. You and I you can see them, you can point them out, you know who they are, you can name them right now. We have a whole list. And yet, in our culture and in our society, the question is still being screamed out. Is this all there is? Is there more than this? Is there more meaning and significance that I can experience than this? Listen, so much of our culture is spending life on themselves, and yet the question has not been answered. That's because that's the wrong model. It's the wrong model. And so today, we're talking about being spent for the purposes of God. How do we do that? And Paul continues in Philippians chapter 2, talking to his parishioners that he pastors and he loves, and he says this: I want to give you the 3 steps to being spent for the purposes of God. I want to give them to you today. The first is this. Paul says to them, do the work. For those of you that went to men's conference, that'll be a familiar saying to you, and we'll get to that in a moment. But do the work, he says. I want to read to you this verse, Philippians chapter 2, verse 12. Therefore, my dear friends, as you have always obeyed, not only in my presence, but now much more in my absence, continue to work out your salvation with fear and trembling. Notice that Paul did not say work for your salvation. Praise God for that. You know what working for your salvation is? You better keep doing what God tells you to do, because otherwise he's not going to be pleased with you and he's going to take your salvation away from you. That you better measure up. You better perform. You better get it right, because there's a chance, and you don't want to take this chance of getting to heaven, and he might look at you and go, you're not accepted. He didn't say work for your salvation. He said work out your salvation. That means Paul is saying this: you have been given a deposit of salvation in your life. Now figure out how to put it into practice. The better way of saying it might be this: how to work in your salvation. How to work it into my priorities. How to work it, it's like kneading dough. How to work it into my choices. How to work it into the way I've structured my life. How to work it into my home. How to work it into how I lead my family. How to work it into how I serve at my church. How to work it in and work it out. To put into practice the things that have been deposited in your life. When people receive the deposit of salvation, there's usually 2 different responses that people have. And they're on 2 different extremes, and they're both wrong. The first is this. People say this: if I surrender to God and I receive salvation, I've got to put all those Christian things to work in my life. No smoking, no cussing, no cheating, no gambling, right? People got a list of what they think that means. Right? And so when I receive the deposit of salvation, all of a sudden I got to be good. I got to be good. And you hear people, we even say this to you: I can't go to church. I haven't cleaned it up good enough yet. God might strike me with lightning. Where is that attitude birthed from? It's birthed from the attitude: if I receive the deposit of salvation, I have to be good, perform good, get it right. I have to work for my salvation. That's basically what that attitude is. Because remember who saved us. The one who took us at our worst and said, follow me, I'm going to step you in 1 step at a time. But there's another extreme reaction that people have too to salvation. They receive a deposit of salvation and they say, I'm good. I'm good. No more work to do here. I'm going to go back in my merry way. And they go right back into their life with no effort, with no putting it into practice, with no work being done to work out their salvation. And they begin, and their salvation becomes a lot like the things become in our life that we put no attention to, no work to, no value to. You know what happens to those things? They end up in our garage. Well, first they start in our closet, because we're not convinced that we're going to throw it away or we might need it. And then it goes from our closet to the garage, and then it goes from our garage to the dumpster. Because we've carried it far enough. I'm not carrying this thing anymore. And this is what people do with their salvation. I'm good. I'm going to go about my merry way. I'm not going to give it any value, any attention, any work, any effort. And so what's going to happen is that ends up in the garage of their life. And eventually, like Jesus teaches us, the seed on the path that is firm, the bird comes and snatches it away. The enemy comes and snatches it away, and it doesn't exist. It doesn't live in us anymore. That's what Paul says. Don't do either one of those extremes. You've been covered by grace. Step it out with the Savior. Work it into your life. Put it into practice. Do the work. Do the work. This is the thing that the Lord wants us to understand today. Listen, we all know we're doing work right if our work produces something more in us than just making money. Right? Work is good for making money. The Bible talks to us that we should work for what we have. But work, if it's only about making money, it's not doing a good work in us, right? This is why every parent with a teenager wants their teenager to get a job, right? It's not about the money. I can pay your bills. Your bills are very small. I want the work to work in you. I want you to carry responsibility. I want you to learn how to answer to a boss. I want you to learn what happens when you don't answer to the boss. I want you to learn how to be on time. I want you to learn how to have consequences when you're not on time. I want you to let work on you, right? And we know that work is being done right when work changes us. You tell a firefighter or a policeman your work hasn't shaped you. Work shapes us. You tell a person that works in construction, your work hasn't shaped you. He's going to show you his hands and go, see all these calluses right here? Work has shaped me. You tell a teacher that has to be in a classroom with crazy kids every day that work hasn't shaped me. Work has shaped them. Work shapes us. And Jesus wants us to put our salvation into work and to work it out and to work it in because it changes us. And then he adds this other line. He says this. He goes, and work out your salvation with fear and trembling. Wait a minute, hold up. I thought I'm not supposed to fear in the Lord. Fear is bad, fear is not from God. All these things we say. Why would Paul tell us to work it out with fear and trembling? Here's the reason. He says, work it out because there's too much on the line. That's the key if you're going to work out your salvation, is to realize what's on the line. There's a lot on the line with me not working out my salvation. We have this lie. Let's call it for what it is. We have this lie that comes into our lives that somehow, if I don't work on my relationship with God for a while, I'm the only one it affects. And we go through life and we think, I can just kind of play it cool and not really give myself to the things of God for a few months. I'm okay. I'm in a good place right now. I can let it ride for a little bit. But the lie is that your life is the only one on the line. Your life is not the only one on the line. You see, when Jesus called you, set you apart, saved you, transformed you, changed you, you became a vessel at that moment that God wants to work through, that he begins to bring his purposes and his plans through, that begins to affect other people around you. Now your kids are on the line. Now your marriage is on the line. Now your coworkers on the line, your boss is on the line, your neighbors are on the line. These people, the lost is on the line. These people are on the line because you are the vessel that has access to their life. It's on the line. Work out your salvation with fear and trembling because there's too much on the line to not work it out. And if you don't work it out, you're going to see things not come to fruition that God has planned, and you can't afford it. You can't afford it. You don't want to afford it. You will regret not affording it. Work it out with fear and trembling. We went to, as I told you, we went up to Man Up Conference, and this was the theme of the whole conference, do the work. And one of the sessions, a good friend of mine that I've known since he was in college and I was young in ministry, got up on the stage. And he said, 5 years ago, I was in this very conference, sitting right back there. And I had men from my church with me. He was the pastor. And he said 5 years ago, a guy got up on this stage and he said, men, we've got to do the work. We need to hold ourselves accountable. We need to work out our salvation. And you know what? Those secret places in your life you need to be accountable to. You need to tell somebody in your life some of your weaknesses. You need to confess some things in your life to some people about some things and thoughts and attitudes that are going on in your heart. You need to make yourself accountable and surrender yourself to somebody being able to speak into your life. You need to do the work. And he said he sat back 5 years ago and heard that and said, I'm not going to do that. And we got all kinds of excuses. I'm a pastor. It's not safe. What will they think of me? Blah, blah, blah. All the stuff, right? Because that's what the enemy does. He fills us with doubts. So he says, I'm not doing that. And he confessed that 6 months after walking away from the call to do the work, he entered into an extramarital affair. You think anything was on the line? Lost his wife, lost his kids, lost his ministry, lost respect. He lost it all. All. Lost it all. And he now stands on a stage being a man who did not do the work, saying, let me tell you what you have to lose. Please, I beg you, do the work. Work out your salvation. Because there's too much on the line. Praise God. It's been a 5-year process. And God has restored his family. But can I just tell you something? That doesn't happen without doing the work. Without surrendering to Jesus, without saying, Jesus, I am totally lost everything. I'm totally a mess. I am totally broken. However you're going to lead me, I'll follow. And Jesus put the pieces back together. He didn't put the pieces back together. And he shared the testimony, and they gave him a picture, a plaque that had divorce papers split in half with a picture of their family put on top of those divorce papers as a testimony to hang in their home. But here's the deal. If you don't work it out, it doesn't work. You have to work out your salvation. If we're going to be spent for the plans and the purposes of God, we have to do the work. Second thing this morning is this. We have to grab hold of a purpose bigger than myself, yourself. Grab hold of a purpose bigger than yourself. Philippians chapter 2, verse 13. For it is God who works in you to will and to act according to fulfill his good purpose. It is God who works in you to will and to act. Paul reminds us that Jesus set the example. He calls us to follow the example and to make the choice to spend our lives in a way that Jesus spent his life. You know, when you begin to spend yourself and putting your salvation into practice, you begin to find your work is going to be attached to a purpose. It's not just because he said so, right? That's what our parents used to say to us. I said so. And for me, I always challenge against that. Well, give me the purpose. Give me the why. I need the why. I said so. That's the why. I said, that's not good enough. That's why I got in a lot of trouble. He said, but what we find out as we start to work out our salvation, it's attached to a purpose, right? So when Jesus comes close to me and says, Pastor Lance, he doesn't call me pastor. He says, Lance, we need to work on that attitude. We need to work on that angry attitude. Let's talk about that. Fine. Let's work on my angry attitude. But what I begin to realize as I grow up in Christ is that thing he wanted to do in me now was to prepare me for the thing he had for me later. And if I don't work on it now, the purpose is going to be missed later. Amen. He attaches our work to a purpose. I've met a lot of angry people in my life I got a chance to talk to. I've got a lot of people that have struggled with some of the same things that I've struggled with. I got to talk to. He attaches our work with a purpose. We have to grab a hold of something bigger than ourselves. Our kids begin to depend on how we work out our salvation. Our family and the lost around us depend on how we work out our salvation. Our divine appointments that God has appointed for us in our life, that you're going to be the voice of God in the moment for that person, is dependent on you working out your salvation. You've got to grab a hold of the idea that God, when you became a Christian, when you invited God into your life, you gave him permission to lead you, you became a vessel. And that vessel is designed to be put to work and to be spent for his purposes and to attach with a purpose of doing his purpose in somebody else's life. Work is more fulfilling when it's attached to a purpose. It's more fulfilling. There's this crazy vicious cycle that's going on in our culture right now. And the cycle is this. somewhere in our minds, in our heads, in our emotions, we have attached what the better life is. It looks like fill in the blank, right? And so we want to get that better life. And many times we go acquire that thing that tells us it's going to be a better life before we can actually pay for it. We didn't really need it to put food on the table. We didn't need it to pay the mortgage. But something about that thing screams out, this is going to be better life for you. I need this. And so we go and acquire these things that are painting the picture of our better life, and then we become a slave to the thing that we have just acquired so that we can pay for it. And now families are working. Both spouses in the house are working 40, 50, 60, 80 hours to serve the thing that tells them that they have a better life, all to find out as they're slaving for that thing that they're missing out on the very thing that actually gave them purpose and meaning. It's a vicious cycle, and it's happening in our culture. And here's the deal. Jesus wants us to be made for more, but more doesn't look like more stuff, better life, have this, have that. And there's this new phenomenon that's happening in people that are in their young 20s. They call them the millennials. It's a title, but here's the deal. There's a reason why they're making the choices that they're making. It's not for no reason. And if you ask them, many of them say, I would rather have a job that has purpose than a job that pays me more money. Do you know whose parents these people are? The people that became a slave to the stuff. There's a reason why they want purpose more than money. Because they saw their family slave for stuff that promised a better life, and it wasn't a better life. I don't want that for myself. Because here's the deal. When we begin to spend our lives on things that are all about us, we become trapped. When we spend our lives for the things that are the purposes of God, that advance His kingdom, we become released. Two totally different lives. And when I say released, I don't mean released from the trap. I mean released to fulfill purpose. To accomplish the things you were designed for. To run and to live and to walk the way you were designed to live. You become released. And this is what we have to understand today. We have got to grab a hold of an image, of a vision that is bigger than ourselves. Feeling spent is not something we have to grow accustomed to. Many of you already in this room already feel spent. And the fact that I'm telling you to spend yourself more is probably overwhelming you right now. I'm telling you to spend differently. Not spend more, spend differently. Spend it the way you were designed to spend it. Don't spend it the way the world wants to tell you to spend it. There are things that God has made you to accomplish, purposes He's designed you to fill, callings that only you can fulfill. He designed you and wired you for it, but you have to spend yourself differently. If we want to experience the more that we are made for, we have to grab a hold of this vision for life that is bigger than me. That my life in the hands of a powerful, loving God can have an eternal impact on people around me, on a hurting world, on the lost, on the desperate, on people who are enslaved by the trappings of this world. My life can have an eternal impact. But you got to grab the vision. Nobody can grab it for you. Nobody can redirect your life. Nobody can spend you differently. You and you alone get to spend your life. We've got to grab the vision. Third thing this morning is this. We have to make it your goal, our goal, my goal, to practice going to bed empty. You're like, I'm already there, Pastor Lance. In fact, I don't even make it to bed. I'm on the couch empty. I'm in the lounge chair empty. with the TV and my remote empty, and my remote in my hand empty. And my kids, they have to come home and put pot pies in the oven to survive because I got nothing to give them. I'm done. I'm spent. They got to survive. It's to the wolves in our house. I got nothing. It's funny, but it's true. We have completely put all the margins. We're out on the margins of our paper. There's no room on our paper. There's no room in our lives. We're on the back side of the paper drawing. We're not even supposed to be living on the back side, but we're drawing and writing and scribbling on the back side. There is no room. There's no space in our lives. And so the call to be spent, the call to be emptied for the purposes of God, oftentimes falls on deaf ears because I'm already there. Don't ask me for one more thing. But what are you emptied from? What did you spend it on? Was it something that fulfilled your life or something that fulfilled the purposes of God? Philippians 2, chapter 17 and 18. But even if I'm being poured out like a drink offering on the sacrifice and service coming from your faith, I am glad and rejoice with all of you. So you too should be glad and rejoice with me. I want to give you some perspective. Paul's in prison, and the church that he pastored is living out his example. Did you see it? Upon your service and your sacrifice. So here's a guy who loves these people deeply, set the example for them, pastored them in jail, knowing he's probably about ready to give his life. He doesn't know for sure, but he thinks he's probably about ready to give his life. And he sees the service and the sacrifice of the people that he served, and he says, look at them. Their lives are on the altar, being burnt for the purposes of God. And he says, my life is being poured out like a drink offering upon your service and your sacrifice. You see, back in the times of the Jewish temple, they would make sacrifices upon the altar, and they would sacrifice animals. And that smell of burnt animal was not really that pleasant to smell. And they had all kinds of offerings and sacrifices. They made praise offerings, thanksgiving offerings, offerings for sin, all that kind of stuff. And another thing they would do, though, is they would have a cup or a drink of wine or whatever, and they would come upon the altar and they would pour the drink offering on top of the burnt offering on the altar. And you've probably all been camping or been around a campfire enough to know what happens when you put liquid on a fire, right? A cup of liquid or something. It sizzles and it fries and smoke comes up, but it also, there's a smell that comes up as well. And especially if you have something that is made of fruit that gets burnt, it comes up, it releases a smell and aroma. And the sign of being poured out a drink offering upon the altar of the other sacrifice, it replaced that bad smell with something wonderful and beautiful, an aroma up to God. And it was a symbol of me pouring out my life. My life is yours. You can spend it, God, however you want to. I'm going to pour it out on the altar of sacrifice and let it be an aroma to you, God, that's pleasing to you. He says, I pastored you. I gave everything I had, and now you're sacrificing and serving. And my life is poured on top of that. It's all mingled together. We all have a part in the glory that God is receiving of this church being built. A drink offering. What an amazing word picture that God gives us in the scriptures. He wants us to live and to follow that example. The word spent is defined: used up, consumed, drained of energy and effectiveness as a result of being consumed. What a joyful picture. We would say those things about something very negative and nasty in our society. Used up, consumed, empty. We would not hold that up as a standard, as an example of what our lives are supposed to look like. See, the world tells us you're supposed to fill all the tanks. Got to fill them up. Got to fill your emotional tank. Got to fill all the tanks. Got to fill them up because you don't want to be on empty. You don't want to run on empty because then we got to start going to see counselors, and then we got to go see. We got to fill the tank, fill the tank, fill the tank, fill the tank. Paul says, empty the tank. Empty it out. Last drop. Spend it all for the purposes of God. Doesn't God care about rest? You better believe he does. He created the Sabbath. 1 day a week. We're supposed to rejuvenate and fill up. But it's not just your physical body. It's your spiritual body. Where you take a day, a full day, and you come into the presence of God. And he fills you up, and he fills up that tank to overflowing, and he encourages you, and he pours out his spirit on you, and he lets you rest physically too. You rest physically and spiritually. So that what? So that Monday through Saturday, you can spend it all again. And come in coasting on Sunday morning with the last drop being given to those kids that yelled at me in the car. And let God fill you back up again. You see, that's God's design. He doesn't want you to not have rest. He doesn't want you to be neglected, not taken care of, not healthy. He's got a system for that. But we ignore his system and we go after all other kinds of things of rest, trying to replenish our tanks and all this stuff. And all that stuff, I'm telling you, is not God's plan. It's the worldly plan. He's got a system for that. It's called the Sabbath. We have to honor it. We went to Hawaii on a ministry trip. It was a conference. It was actually a pastor's conference. And we had 2 days to spend for personal use afterwards. And I made the mistake. I don't know if any of you have ever made this mistake before. You know the 90-minute presentation to get a free luau? Just in case anybody ever asks you that, it's never 90 minutes. Okay, I'm just telling you right now. So we did this thing. It's stupid. But we spent our whatever time, and we toured this wonderful, beautiful place on the ocean, granite countertops, marble floors. And the whole time we're being shown this place. You need to do this for your family. Think of your family time. You're going to get to spend here at this beautiful place. Think of all the family time. Think of all the times you'll share with your 2 sons out on the beach, paddleboarding and snorkeling. No, thank you. Can I have my free luau now? I mean, it's only $38,000. Think of the investment. It's the investment you're investing in your family's health and well-being. You got to recharge the tanks. No, thank you. Can I have my free luau now? I need to go. He got angry and literally said this phrase to me. Don't you love your family? I love them enough to know what's on the line. I love them enough. It won't be a perfect example, but to spend every energy I've got to show them what it means to serve Jesus Christ. I love them enough that I can put my toes in Pinecrest Lake and love them the same as I love them in Hawaii on the beach. I love them enough not to be a slave to something I can't pay for. I love them enough. Listen, are you catching this? Are you catching this? We got to go to bed empty, but we got to go to bed a different kind of empty. A different kind of empty. Because you were created for more, and we don't have to keep going to bed feeling spent with no purpose. That's the made for more that God has called us to live for. And this is what we have to understand. We have got to be, listen, we've created ways to try to fill our tank that are just unbelievable, right? And the world wants to promise you this is where rest is found. This is where family time is found. This is where, listen, can I tell you, God's got a design, and his design's better. And the more we try to ignore that, the more we're going to put ourselves in a hole. We're going to put ourselves in a hole. When your head hits the pillow at night, let me be empty, used up, consumed, drained of energy and effectiveness. Because we gave everything away to the purposes of God and the people he led us to that week and the plans that he tried to unfold in our life. And here's what the Bible tells us. True satisfaction is found in that kind of living. Everything else is a lie from the enemy to get you distracted. I'm telling you, the Bible tells us. And so when we go to put our ladder on against the wall and spend the seasons of our life climbing the rungs, remember the example that Jesus gave. I'm being poured out. Remember the example that Jesus gave. I'm washing feet. Remember the example that Paul gave. I gave my whole life. You have to be empty. Would you stand with me this morning? Worship team, if you come. Guys, can I just encourage you with something? Please, please, please take away the right thing this morning. I'm not telling you don't take vacations. I just got back from one, okay? This is not a sermon against vacations. This is a sermon to challenge, convict, and correct us to spend our lives in the right way, in the designed way, in the way that leads to satisfaction, the way that leads to meaning, the way that leads to purpose, the way that doesn't lead us to trapped and a slave trying to serve all the things I filled it up with. It's a sermon to challenge you to understand that your life, I know we come into church sometimes and we think, I got nothing. I got no, Lord, you can use whatever it is, but it feels like about zero right now. But your life in the hands of a powerful, loving God means eternal change. For someone, you got to grab the vision and say, I want to live that kind of purpose in my life. Would you bow your heads and close your eyes? Paul gives the word picture, the illustration of an altar, of the lives of his congregants in Philippi burning, consumed on an altar. And then he gives the word picture of himself being poured out on top of that, saying they're all in this together. They're all giving their lives to the Lord together. We call this place in the front of the church an altar. And it literally means the same thing. When I come to an altar, and I try to on a regular basis, when I got the opportunity, I come and I come with the attitude, Lord, burn it all away. Here I am again. All the stuff that doesn't look like you, that's not supposed to be there, just burn it. Get rid of it, free me from it, recorrect, realign, readjust, do it all, Lord, so that I'm spending myself the right way. Ashley's going to sing a song. In my life, be lifted high. In my world, we're going to make this personal. We're going to say my, not our. In my world, that's 2603 Centerpiece Court. Be lifted high. In my love, be lifted high. Be lifted high. And when we sing that song, if the Lord has said something to you today, maybe about re-putting your life upon that altar, spending your life differently than you're spending it right now. Not living for the tank full, but living for the tank empty. Maybe you just want to recommit. Lord, I give it to you again. It's not very much, but you can have it. Spend it how you want. As she sings that song, I'm just going to ask you physically, not metaphorically, physically, to put your life on the altar and have some conversations with God and reaffirm that desire of your heart again. Would you come as she sings this morning, and let's do some business with the Lord.
In my